Chapter 8. How could you tell when to sleep and when to stay awake, or when to think and when to dream, when you never know if you're asleep or awake? So all you can do is live in a nightmare which loves to roam every domain. I would have said I have had 2 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy, or 3, or 5, or 20, or 60, but the truth is I could no longer tell. Waking up in darkness with my limbs trembling and my body soaked in sweat happened more often than I would have expected. It looked like I had just gotten out of the shower and wrapped myself with clothes instead of a towel. One could not tell the difference between the two apart from the pungent smell escaping my drenched body. Darkness was always there. He never left me, unlike everyone else. Sleeping was painful. All the bones in my body poked out in awkward ways. They irritated me when I lay down, for they all prodded me with their pointy selves. All that was left in me now was bones. The little bit of meat and fat layering under my skin were drawn up by the electricity like blood taken up by a syringe. Were they killing me? I often questioned myself, but I could never answer it. It was decided I did not have a mind sound enough to let me eat on my own. My mouth was dry despite having gulped down enough glasses of water to make me wrap my arms around my belly. My lips begged me to let something pass between them. The last edible thing to enter my mouth was that disgusting porridge that had led to this terrible fate. I was being fed by tubes, and at times I did not even know when they started and finished. I assumed it was when I was asleep, for I never roused with an empty stomach. I just wanted something good to eat, or at least something to chew, just a normal candy, because I was tired of chewing my tongue all the time. It held no taste. My fingers were now always wrinkly. Another envelope eyed me suspiciously, mirroring my expression. It had been sitting on that table for a while now. I could never say for how long, for he never let me see through him into the light he hid behind his muscular self. The bulb on the ceiling was always turned on because I feared him. I was terrified of what he could do to me. The bit of light was enough to remind me of the existence of a truer source. But he also reminded me of those nights I lay awake in bed and heard her snore. He evoked images of all the times I went into the forest to witness the horrors that were to remain with me for life. I was tired of staring at the closed envelope that lay beside the open one. Every time the nurse came into the room, she glanced at the envelope, perhaps wanting to know the dramatic significance of the paper bag. I do not remember the nurse's name. She told me, but I was under the influence of one of the pills I was made to swallow. Or perhaps I was completely aware of my surroundings and I found no significance in such things anymore. Her name was not worth remembering, for all she did was rule my nightmares along with her favorite machine and that doctor in her dark kingdom. I got up, picked the envelope, and sat back down on the bed. My legs ached from not walking. It felt like all the muscles had been stitched together and were now molding into one another like balls of clay, cheek by jowl being baked into one. I stood back up so that I was directly under the light. Mustering up the fortitude I had in me, I tore open the paper and first read the note this time. I got to know you already know about the truth of your birth. This envelope also contained a photograph. This time it was of her lips in a languid position. She was still wearing the same shade, exquisitely outlining the shape of her lips and attracting all the lustful eyes the male voices in my head could incite through my red, innocent, sleep-deprived eyes. I looked at the note once more and wondered, could she be sending these? Both the letters were about her, but she was not one to bother this much. She worked in her own wicked, manipulative ways. She worked through lies, never through manual labor. Besides, she was illiterate. She could not have written it in a million years. That was why she hated my mother so much. No illiterate woman likes her daughter-in-law to be literate and have the upper hand. But my poor mother never had the upper hand. She always remained silent, just like how she was supposed to, because the sheer terror of my grandmother's words was enough to drive a sane person off the edge if they spent too long with her. That's why I often thought we were all going to die before her. My cousin Maria sat next to me in the quiet room. It was the two of us seeking refuge from the villain. "There's something I have to tell you," she said, pulling her hair to the back and pinning it there. We had just escaped a conversation she had naughtily sparked, talking about gender equality with my grandmother, who was obsessed with the dominance of men. It was rather ironic, for she dominated her husband, who left her with the excuse of a cardiac arrest. We slipped out of the room, leaving Mariah's poor mother to listen to my screaming grandmother. The hapless woman never escaped from the mental anxieties our grandmother had to offer. "You know why she's worse to you than the rest of us?" she said as she further fixed her rough hair. I gave her a nonplussed look. "Well, I mean apart from Carrie, poor girl definitely got the worst of it." She paused and looked into my eyes. It was obvious she was regretting starting the conversation and was searching for excuses to go back. But knowing her, she only went forward. "Sylvia told me about this, so I didn't really pay much attention to it." She tried softening it. Sylvia was Elise's favorite granddaughter. Even Leona could not beat her to it for some unknown reason. Sylvia was Carrie's sister as well, who loved her in front of us and hated her behind closed doors. But Carrie was made too stupid to do anything about it. Our grandmother had 4 children, 1 daughter and 3 sons. Mariah was the daughter of the oldest son, Uncle David, and had 3 siblings, one of whom died during the early stages of his life. Sylvia and Carrie were begotten by Elise's daughter, along with 1 other girl, Helena. My Uncle John had 3 sons, then came my father, the youngest of all, and hence the most loved. Or at least that's what I thought until I found out about his story. She only loved him because he sent her handsome amounts of money every month. Nothing in his life was beautiful. According to his mother, he had the worst wife the world could harness, and his younger daughter was the ugliest girl she had seen. Whenever I inadvertently laughed or grinned in front of her, flashing my crooked teeth, she always shouted, "Put your hand on your disgusting mouth!" My mother would just look at me with an apologetic expression, while my father looked at the floor in stigma of the accidental product. When Leona was born, Grandma wasn't happy. She was pretty frustrated because she wasn't a boy, but, who couldn't love Leona? She was eventually made happy with her being a girl and your parents having their small family. You know how she let it go? She stared at me as if waiting for me to answer. I just looked into her knowledgeable eyes with my curious ones. Your father bought her dresses and rings and necklaces to make her feel better. Of course, it was not unusual for me to hear this. Mariah had once told me that our grandmother was struggling with depression, so she was taken to the best mental hospital, which gave a marvelous view of the mountains and streams and a river. The doctor told Uncle David, who had helped her to get in there in the first place, to buy her 2 dresses and her depression will cease to exist. She only spent 2 days over there, and that made her feel special for some time, and her depression was surely cured after a day at the boutique. She was then normalized and forbid your parents to have another child. If they were to have one, it was to be a boy, or she would bury the baby alive. So they promised never to have any kids, and they did not seem like they considered having another kid. She paused and changed her tone and said, "I still love you. This rubbish doesn't matter to me." She smiled at me, and I exerted my best to imitate it in my broken mirror. Anyway, we all know how when Aunt Julie was born, Grandma cried and cried to God to either give her a son next time or no child at all. And you also know how much she hates your mother, so it wasn't hard for her to abhor your mother even more when you were accidentally born. She cried like a mad woman. Worse than she did when Aunt Julie was born, father said. My heart shriveled up. I could not take it any more. I asked Mariah to excuse me and ran to the powder room. The regret showcased in Mariah's eyes never left, but that did not matter. I thought I was strong enough to bear her words, to bear the cruelty of my grandmother, but I was wrong. This account made my mother's status rise in my eyes. She was ready to accept me for who I was, despite me being someone who was nothing in front of her dear Leona, and who was a demon in the eyes of the woman who dominated her. I had further ruined my mother's life through my unsolicited anatomy. The note had no signature like the previous one. Why was this person interested in my birth when all I now cared was for death? Why did they care to remind me of these stories when I had all the time in the world to reminisce them? I had not imagined my grandmother's thoughts to stretch out to me in a place like this, but they did. I could easily say she was someone who could haunt a person without even trying. It was much simpler to dwell in the negative thoughts swirling before me rather than to try to escape them, to go on a quest for my sanctuary where I would rest for the remaining days. I could easily script up the conversations that took place behind our backs between my grandmother and Aunt Julie. They were true talkers, obnoxiously loud and always energetic. Feeling dirty and sticky with all sorts of malignant voices running through my head, I decided to shower. It was disconsolate how these voices were as loud as they always were. If there was one hope I had about this inhumane therapy, it was that I will be able to expel these voices. Perhaps not all of them, but at least some. But I was wrong. I could recognize each and every one of them. They spoke in their own accents, some from here, some from there, some from the past, some from what I envisioned the future would be. Some were men, some were women, some were children, some were elderly. Each voice had a distinct quality about it, which is why I could never tell myself there was just one person or two who said the same things repeatedly. But all of them sung it like an anthem. It was an army against me. How could I stand up for myself when I was completely divided like the tiny property of a dead man with 8 starving children? I wrapped myself in a towel and dried my hair with another. I was about to place the towel to the side after using it when I stopped to notice it under the weak light. The towel was home to a large net of wavy broken hair. The black stood out on the white prominently in the faded light. I put the towel in the sink and used the white comb in the cupboard to untangle my hair. I started pulling it down through my damp hair, making the water droplets plummet to the floor as I yanked it down. It was collecting black hair which covered it like a thread on a loom. Not believing what I saw, with my mouth open and a strain on my eyes resultant of the bad light, I combed my hair with the ferocity I often subjected myself to. It was only a matter of seconds that my scalp hurt, and all the hair that were not broken were threatening to join their partners if I did not stop. End of chapter 8.